So welcome back to Academic Plug, and on this video we're going to go through the 2018 EMS Term 3 Grade 8 question paper in revision and preparation for the 2025 Term 3 exam that you guys are going to write, right? So as you can see on the screen, the question paper is on the left. And for those of you who are skeptical to say, well, if this question paper is so old, is it the same questions that we're going to write? The answer is yes, because the scope that was used to write that question paper from 2018 is 100% the same scope that is going to be used to set the question and the exam that you're going to write in Term 3 2025, right? So being able to answer questions on this question paper will allow you to answer the questions that are coming in Term 3, right? 2025. So as we go through the questions, try to engage yourself as much as possible. I'm sure you have your notes, and if you are one of those who don't have your notes, or you lost them, or you didn't even bother, right? There's some of you who don't even have notes at all. You just don't take notes seriously. Fortunately, you're watching this video, so I'm gonna show you just after we discuss the scope, right? So the scope is basically based on entrepreneurship, forms of ownership, financial literacy, the CPJ, and the CRJ, and the accounting equation, and the economy, markets, right? So talking about the notes which I mentioned, you can use the link in the video, right, in the description, and it's gonna lead you to the notes, right? And it's gonna be better that you do that before we delve into the questions, so that you can have a point of reference, right? Even if you have the notes that you've been given by your teacher, it's gonna be complementary to have the notes that we are suggesting to you guys, and you will see the importance as we go through this question paper, right? You will see how not only do you need the notes you were given in class, but also the notes that we have sort of set to complement the notes that you should have been given by your teachers, right? So also use the link in the description to download this question paper so that we can go through it. But basically we'll be going through it, or you can use the one that I'm gonna use here, right? So before we delve into the questions, we have a couple of tools that are gonna be useful for you guys. So talking about Term 3 exam questions, we have over 200 questions that are basically about Term 3 content. Term 3 stuff, that's the scope. You'll be able to learn about the transactions of the CPJ and the CRJ, the forms of ownership, the markets, pretty much everything that has been covered in Term 3, right? And also, for those of you who struggle with EMS, or could be mathematics, we have a very affordable tutoring program. So for $50 a month, you can be tutored EMS, mathematics, and any other subject that you guys study for only $50 per month, right? So if you struggle with EMS, especially the CPJ or the CRJ, given you really find it hard to navigate this, I would suggest you get a tutor. I mean, it's pretty much affordable, right? And some of you do carry pocket money, which equals $50, right? So some of you can afford it by yourselves, but however, it will be helpful if you find that you struggle with the CPJ and the CRJ, because a lot of students complain about the accounting aspect of EMS, right? Because it involves a lot of numbers, a lot of, you know, being able to record the transactions and where, right? So if you're challenged by that, make sure to make use of these tools, right? And also, before we delve into the questions, we have a game which is based on EMS, right? From term 1 to term 4, you can learn everything that is taught in your class and be able to implement it on a game, pretty much, right? Because this game factors in the scope that you guys have been given, right? Since now it's currently term 3, this game will be basically asking you questions or playing things that are related to term 3, right? Including the CRJ, the CPJ, the expenses, the business advertising, because you then get to understand what a real business feels like, right? So it's fun, and it's that kind of a game you can play on your way to school, in the bus or taxi. Yeah. So even in your car. So it's available for Android and iOS and PC as well. But simply if you access it through the link, which is also in the description, then you'll be able to play this game, right? So it's available on the Plug app that we have, right? That's where we also have all the question papers that are for grade 8s and so on, for all the subjects that you guys do, right? So everything, you'll find it in there. So without wasting much time, let's delve into it, right? Okay, so question 1, which is 12 marks. So usually the first questions are sort of, usually you will find the matching of columns or choosing the most correct answer. But in this case, we have the columns, matching of columns, right? And also, before we actually delve into it, there's CAPS AI, right? This is or rather academic AI, which is gonna help you guys. When you have questions, you can simply ask it to make it make sense about EMS concepts, whether you want to understand more about the accounting equation, the CRJ and the CPJ. So it's basically like a tutor, and it's very useful because it's gonna answer your questions at any time, whether it's at night or at 1 a.m., right? So it's really like that tutor that will never say they are tired or you have to show up in class at what time. So it's always going to be there for you, and make use of it. You can also use it to answer your homeworks, your assignments. It's very useful, right? For learning, especially. So, yeah, let's delve into the questions. And by the way, it's gonna be explaining the questions that we are going to be going through on this question paper, right? It's basically gonna be explaining why the certain answer is the correct one as compared to the others, and the explanations, such things that will make us understand more, right? Because since you're going to write, you not only want to see the question and the answer, right? Which is basically a lot of question papers. You will only see a question and the answer. So CAPS AI is going to be very useful in terms of explaining why that answer is correct, right? So yeah, all right. So let's go through 1.1. State the main business activity of a closed corporation. So there are different ways I like to tackle these questions, and basically I have multiple ways. So depending on the questions, right? That's when I'll be able to tell, okay, this, because I have a strategy called the elimination strategy, right? Which basically is like reading a question, then I go through the options, then I remove each one that is not correct until I'm remaining with options that I think are the most correct, right? Then from there, I just sort of reserve those answers. And I mean, that is just my personal strategy sometimes. So I'll sort of write this somewhere or using a pencil because I still want to read the rest of the questions so that by the end I know exactly what's what, right? Because I mean, if you are like myself, I do get stuck in between two options sometimes, right? And if you guys don't have such problems, well, you guys are really geniuses in a way, right? Because I sometimes find myself stuck in between two questions. But let's go through it and I'll basically explain also to what do I mean by that, right? So 1.1, state the main business activity of a closed corporation. So here's what's also important. Note, right? I did mention in the beginning that they are going to be essential for this, right? So it's either you have the notes from class, or if you don't have, at least now you know what to do because we have the notes that we have packaged for you guys, the notes that are dedicated for term 3, right? So you will find everything that you are most likely to be asked in the exam on these notes, right? We talk about various forms of ownership, and we pretty much make it impossible for you guys to fail with this note, right? I mean, failing is even worse. I mean, getting a distinction is what you guys are likely to achieve using the notes because we do not leave a single thing out of these notes, right? And you can sort of use them to complement the notes that you have. Or if you don't have the notes, you can simply use these ones and still manage to pass, right? Yeah, because I'm saying this because there are some of you who don't even write the notes from class. It's like you don't care about the notes, but you do want to pass, right? Which is, I don't know. But you know what to do. The notes are in the link in the description. Make sure that you open them. So for 1.1, you're going to have to understand what a closed corporation is, right? Which is one of the forms of ownership that we have, right? So we have that. So now that we have read 1.1, let's come to our answer options, right? So let's go through the first one, which is expenses, which is not correct. So again, that's elimination strategy, right? Now we know that expenses is no longer our answer or possible answer for 1.1, then we subtract it, right? B, accounting equation, no. C, sole trader. So a sole trader is basically one person who owns their business, right? Does that relate to 1.1? I don't think so. So let's come to the founding statement. Uh, state, okay, that sounds a bit correct. But then here's what I like to do. I don't want to quickly jump into conclusions. I also want to read the rest of the options that are given, right? So let's go through E and F and then we'll look at what we have so far. So board of directors, that's not relevant. F, private and public company. So far we have nothing else that defines anything close to a document, right? I mean, if we look at 1.1, there are keywords, which is also another important thing. Keywords are very important, especially for EMS, right? Because we are still going to pay a lot of attention in terms of the CPJs that we're going to do, and further down the question paper, right? So keywords are very important. So in 1.1, the keyword that I'm paying attention to is state, right? Because the word state basically means informs in a way, right? And what's most likely, and what informs is basically a document, or it could even be somebody just informing you. But stating basically means to inform or to communicate, right? And given the options that we have, founding statement seems to be the most correct answer, right? Because a founding statement is pretty much like a document as far as I'm reading it, right? Because without even actually knowing the definition and understanding exactly what a closed corporation is, you can just sort of make sense about these keywords, right? Which is sometimes important because you might find yourself that, okay, you did study everything, but then you come across some questions and you realize you don't necessarily have so much reference. So you can sort of make sense of it in terms of keywords, right? So stating means it's something that gives information. So it's most likely to be a document. And D is talking about founding statement. Founding basically means the reason for, or rather, founding basically means, I mean, I'm sure you are familiar with when somebody says the founding CEO, right? That basically means somebody who started that company. So when they start that company, they are most likely to have their or have somewhere or a document that describes the type of company that they founded, how it operates, the problems that it solves. So that's basically what a founding statement is, right? So let's also make sense of it with Caps AI. So Caps AI is making the same uh so Caps AI also has merged the same which is D, right? Which is the founding statement, right? So let's read the explanation. The founding statement, also known as Form CK1, is the official document used to register a closed corporation in South Africa. It contains all essential details about a business, right? So this is what it is in definition, right? Yeah, which is basically what that is. So let's come to 1.2. And also I would like you guys to also challenge yourselves and try to answer these questions before we actually look at the answers, right? Just to see how much you know so far and how much you do not yet know, right? To then make sure that you get the notes that we are talking about, or study and understand what you did not understand before, right? So let's go through 1.2. Stationery, consumable stores, advertising. So here's what your mind does when you have read the first question, then read all the answers. So by reading all the answers, we now know which direction to look because we have read options such as the expenses, which I think now after reading that, on, when we were answering 1.1, now when we answer 1.2, I know where to look. So expenses is pretty much more of a description of this, but here's what I also like to do. I also like to read the rest of the questions because what if 1.2 is not necessarily the most correct, right? Because here's what I'm saying by the most correct. So the examiner can give you one question with two options that are similar or that are not necessarily incorrect, but the most correct answer is the one that's gonna get a mark, right? Because they do this to try to confuse you guys, especially with the question and multiple answers, right? So read everything and try to make sense of it. And the way I try to make sense of things that I'm reading is to actually ask myself, right? Like I did, like I just dissected what the keywords are, right? Then I sort of went on and tried to make sense of it. Then also end up making a sense of the options that I think is correct, right? Then when I match it up, then I realize, okay, well, this cannot be any more correct than it is, right? And that's how I managed to find one option D for 1.1, right? So let's try to do that for 1.2. Stationery, consumable stores, advertising. That's basically sounds like expenses. So we have already discovered expenses on the column B, but I wanted us to read the rest of the questions. So is Tim that manages a company? No. That doesn't sound like the most correct answer for expenses, right? Because isn't it the pattern is to match column A with column B? So now I'm trying to match the option that I think is correct from column B, and I'm trying to match it with the questions on column A, right? Which is quite unusual to do. But if you try this and practice it, you will realize how it makes your life even easier, right? So expenses doesn't sound like a team that manages a company. And expenses might fall under uh expenses. Does it fall under the accounting equation? I'm now starting to think that could be true, but okay, let's read 1.5. Raises capital by selling shares. That's not correct. Suited to informal traders and retail stores. Suited to informal traders. Okay, so here's another question that sort of struck me, which is 1.4, right? Is expenses relevant to 1.4? The answer is yes, right? But is it the most correct answer? I don't think so. So let's actually, because when I'm doing this, right, I don't necessarily go like step by step or 1.1 by 1. My mind kind of jumps around, and in that way I find myself um able to come up with the right answer, right? I don't know how. I don't know. I mean, if you guys do it like 1 by 1, 1.2, and you get it right until 1.6, well, I should be learning your formula, right? So 1.4, because we've jumped 1.3 and 1.2, by the way, but let's try to make 1.4, 4, because this is what I'm referring to the elimination strategy. I'm trying to match everything as soon as I pay attention to it, then sort of lead with that, right? That's why now I'm jumping around. And I hope you don't get confused by this, right? If you don't usually do this. So 1.4, I think it's okay. Now I'm starting to merge assets with expenses and accounting equation. But in this case, when I look at 1.4 and I look at option B, I think 1.4 is matching most with accounting equation, which is option B, right? Instead of option A, which is expenses. Why? Because, I mean, you have to look at how the question is described, right? And you also have to look at what the answer is on the other side, which is accounting equation. I mean, these two are not further explained or something, like they just direct, and therefore I'm able to match them easily, right? So now I know that 1.4 is B. Now let's come back to our 1.3, right? Because we've now dealt with 1.1 and 1.2. Okay, team that manages a company, right? So expenses, we've already eliminated that one. Accounting equation, we have eliminated that one. Sole trader, we haven't dealt with it. Funding statement, we've dealt with it. We have eliminated that one also. Now, board of directors, right? So now let's do that. What I said is sort of making sense of what I'm reading. Okay, so we just read that team that manages a company. So what is a team, right? Now I'm making sense of keywords. A team is a group of people that come together with a common goal, common task that they want to do. And it goes on to say that manages a company. So these are people that are now described to be responsible of a company, because manages means responsible of something, right? And in this case, it's a company. So let's come to the right side. That cannot be F, right? Because private and public company, I mean, even the English is just not matching that much, right? You can just sort of tell when two sentences cannot be combined to make one meaningful thing, right? So a team does, okay, now let's come to E, right? Which says board of directors. So board of directors, that sounds like a group of people. I mean, even the word directors, these are people who are responsible for making decision to say, let's go in this direction, right? Especially in businesses, they are the ones that say, okay, next month we are going to implement this and this and this, or we are going to grow the company this way in this area, you know? So E is sort of matching with 1.3 because they're descriptions in the way that I have sort of tried to make sense of them. In my mind, right? Now I can see whether they are the most relevant to each other, right? So 1.3 is E. We just sort of gonna, do that. And now we are left with 1.5 because 1.4 we have already dealt with it, right? So raises capital by selling shares. Uh, okay, so this one is gonna need you to have a bit of understanding. It's either you have read the notes and you have understood the forms of ownership, right? But here's one of the tips and trick, which will make sense as I do this. So I'm going to skip 1.5. Why? Because 1.6 is the last question before the actual last one, which is going to be 1.5 in this case, right? You can sort of do this if you feel like, okay, you don't necessarily understand the forms of ownership, or you have never paid too much attention about raising of capital and selling of shares, which might happen, right? Especially for those of you who like to do last minute preparations before, I mean, the day before the exam, right? So let's say you are kind of stuck because you didn't go through the notes, right? Now you skip it, 1.5. Let's go to the 1.6. Suited to informal traders and retail stores. Because I'm saying this because I've seen option C, which is sole trader, right? Because now, let's say you didn't even read or you don't even understand what a sole trader is, right? Now you're stuck in between 1.5 and 1.6. You don't know which one because we are left with two answers, right? Which is sole trader and F, which is private and public company. So, private and public company, sole trader, right? There's a bit of clash in these two answers, right? Because a sole trader, I mean, even if you don't know the concept of a sole trader, you do understand the word sole basically means alone or one or, you know, trader. I mean, obviously, you know that's it's not talking about Forex, right? So a sole trader, you can just sort of have an understanding that sole is one person. And if the word is trader, then that means that person is doing some sort of trade, right? Then you can then come to 1.6 and 1.5 and say, does raising of capital by selling shares relate to sole trader? Or it relates to suited to informal traders and retail stores? Okay, let's understand informal traders, right? Informal. I mean, you guys are probably wearing uniform, right? What is something that is formal and what is something that is informal? Informal could be referring to the casual clothes that you might sometimes wear to school. And formal is basically saying one predictable uniform, which is could be a shirt and a tie or and the jacket, whatever the case may be. But making sense of these keywords to say informal. So let's say somebody is selling sweets. They just went to a shop and bought sweets and they start selling them, right? Is that something you would say is formal? I don't think so, right? You are most likely to say it's informal simply because it's not registered and it's it's not like a proper business with like a building and you know. So now another keyword which I think is important in this case because sometimes you just simply have to match keywords that look alike. Because if you can look at 1.6 and option C, this option C has trader, 1.6 has traders, right? So you can just sort of connect that dot. If you really found yourself shaking on this one, right, between 1.5 and 1.6. So I mean, if that was the case for me, I would basically navigate this one like that to say, okay, 1.6, let me match it with C, right? Because basically the keywords and the way that I've sort of made sense of it kind of matches with Soul Trader. Now, let's compare that relationship of 1.6 with C to the relationship of 1.5 with F, right? So private and public, right? Um, obviously, if we're talking about private and public company, we know that the word informal has nothing relevant in this sense, right? Because if we're also talking about capital, a raising of capital, right? A selling of shares, can a sole trader um raise shares, right? But here's what I would then do after entering 1.6, right? Because I've meshed it with C, right? Then that means I'm basically left with 1.5 and option F, because these are the last two question and answers. That I mean, we all know that, the last question is mostly supposed to be meshed with the last answer, right? So that will be it if I was stuck in that situation, right? But let's make sense of this using CAPS AI. So was 1.2 correct? A is X. Okay, we've already done that. And 1.3, board of directors. Okay. Yeah, let's make sense of them. 1.2, right? So expenses, of course. These are examples of expenses which are costs incurred in the day-to-day running of a business, right? And when it comes to 1.3, team that manages a company, board of directors. A board of directors is the governing body elected by shareholders to manage a company's strategic decisions and oversight, which is what I kind of touched on when I was just trying to make sense of it to myself, right? Because that whole process that I just did is exactly what I would do if I was sitting in the exam, right? Because there is no CAPS AI there, which is going to explain everything so smoothly for you. So that's a board of directors. Now let's come to 1.4. B, accounting equation, right? This is the fundamental accounting equation used to represent a company's financial position. That's the definition for it, right? And 1.5 says raises capital by selling shares. F, which is private and public company. So private and public companies raise funds by issuing and selling shares to investors or the public. The public companies are listed on stock exchanges, the JSE, right? So 1.6 suited to informal traders and retail stores. C, sole trader. A sole trader is an individual who runs a business alone, right? Which is kind of what I was describing about the keyword sole, right? This type of business is common among informal traders and small retail stores because it's simple and inexpensive to set up, right? You did hear me say if a person just walks into a shop and buys sweets and starts selling them, right? That's inexpensive. So that's pretty much it for question one. And oh, okay, we have our little friend here with something useful. Did you know unlimited liability equals higher personal financial risk? Why do you say that? Right? You could ask yourself. Okay, limited liability equals safer for personal wealth. Risk is limited to business investment only. Okay, this is referring to the forms of ownerships. I mean, we have the sole trader. Okay, okay. So Sarah owns a small bakery alone and takes a loan of 50,000 rand. Business slows down and she can't repay the loan. The bank sues the bank, the business. The bank sues the business. Since Sarah is the business, they can take her car and savings to recover the money. So this is basically explaining the unlimited liability and limited liability in terms of how it plays out for each one of these forms of ownership, right? So that's the case for a sole trader. Let's read about the partnership. John and Tabo run a car repair shop. They take a loan of 100,000 together. Tabo disappears and the loan isn't paid. Oh, Tabo is such a snake, right? The bank sues the partnership. John is held responsible for the full loan, and his personal property can be seized to repay it, right? Hmm. Okay, let's kind of read this again. So John and Tabo run a car repair shop. They take a loan of 100,000 together. Tabo was a partner, right? Whom they have taken a loan of 100,000 together. So that means each one of them have sort of agreed to take this loan. Now, Tabo disappears and the loan isn't paid, right? The bank sues the partnership because Tabo ran away and John, poor guy, remains there, right? And John is held responsible for the full loan. And his personal property can be seized to repay it. Okay. Well, that would hurt, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's the partnership, right? So let's read the close corporation. ACC called Build Fast Project borrows 200,000 from a bank. Business fails and the loan isn't paid. The bank sues the CC. Only the CC assets can be sued to repay the debt. Oh, so compared to a partnership, according to unlimited liability, which is higher personal financial risk, and limited liability is safer for personal wealth, our risk is limited to business investment only. Okay, this is referring to how this affects a partnership, a close corporation, and a sole trader. So if you are one person as a sole trader, the bank will come and repossess what you owe to them. And if the partnership, if one of your partners run away, you who is remaining behind will be held accountable to pay for the full loan, right? Even if your partner ran away. So in terms of a close corporation, the bank sues the CC, which is only the company. Only the CC assets, which means the assets of that company, will be sued. It's either they will take those assets to repay the debt, right? Can be used to repay the debt. Members' personal assets are protected. Okay, so unless one of them signed surety, right? Which is advanced for you guys. I don't think you'll be asked any questions related to surety. But basically we now understand what's unlimited liability and limited liability is in terms of the various forms of ownership, right? So let's read a public company before we go on to question 2. Megatech Ltd, a listed company, is sued by a supplier for breach of contract worth 1 million, right? The company is sued, not the shareholders. Also, this is kind of similar to a closed corporation. Not the shareholders. Only the company's assets are at risk. Shareholders lose nothing personal, like your house and cars and whatever. You might lose the shares though. So even if the company loses the case, right? I think that's preferable as compared to a Who's that guy? Uh, as compared to a Tabo who just disappeared with leaving me in debt. Anyways, so there's also questions from EMS term 3 notes. These are the notes that I was telling you guys about. So let's read a bit here before we go into question 2. How does the following forms of ownership raise capital? Huh. Do you guys know? So a sole trader, how do they raise capital? But at least we know that a public company raises shares by listing the company, right? And making it public, right? But then how does a sole trader raise capital? How does a partnership raise capital? How does a closed corporation raise capital? And also a franchise? So if you guys know the answers to these questions, please write them on the comment, right? But basically, these are questions from the EMS term 3 notes. And yeah, the answers will be there on the notes, right? So make sure to get the notes if you want to understand how these forms of ownership raise capital. So let's come to question 2. Indicate whether the following statements are true or false. Write only the letter next to the number on the answer booklet. So I guess you'll be given like a booklet, right? Where you can then write whether these statements are true or false, right? Okay, so let's read 2.1. But before we do this, such questions are gonna require us to have a bit of understanding about what's going to be asked, right? I don't think you can pull it off by common sense. So that's why we have set up the over 200 questions, because what we've done is that we have like 50 questions just based on forms of ownership, and we have like 60 questions based on CPJs only, right? And another 60 based on CRJs, and others based on um the accounting equation. We have a lot of questions that are just based on each one of the scope that is going to be used to set the term 3 exam that you guys are going to write, right? So after completing those 200 questions, I mean, trust me, it's gonna be like a walk in the park. Like, failing is going to be very hard, like really hard. All right, so let's go through 2.1. Closed corporations are still the most suitable forms of ownership for persons who want to start a business and protect their possessions. Okay, let's see what Kepsea says. False, right? Closed corporations are no longer registered in South Africa since 2011. Existing ones may continue, but new businesses typically register as private companies to protect personal possessions. Okay, 2.2. A maximum of 50 members can form a closed corporation. I mean, this one you clearly cannot get it right if you don't understand the forms of ownership, which are there on the notes, right? So let's see what Kevzea says. It says false. A closed corporation could have maximum of 10 members, not 50. Okay. 2.3. Premiums are the remuneration received by shareholders. Okay, so in this case, I mean, from top of my mind, I understand that shareholders don't earn anything called premiums. They earn dividends, right? That's what I understand. And yeah, basically that's false. So let's look at what Kev said. Okay. So premiums are not shareholder remuneration. Dividends are, right? Premiums could refer to the amount paid above the nominal value for shares. Okay. 2.4, a partnership does not pay taxes. True. A partnership itself does not pay tax. Partners are taxed individually on their share of the profits. Oh, so this means, I mean, this makes sense also, right? Because imagine a partnership. I mean, basically, the kind of relationship between partners, right? Let's say one partner is very experienced in accounting, right? So that means they will take the accounting department. And if the other partner is not necessarily that intellectual, what are they going to do, right? So that now leads to them negotiating to say, hey, since I understand more about accounting and in terms of efforts, I'm the one who's doing the most of the job in the company that both of us own. We could be having the same shares, but let's sort of ration the profits so that I can earn a bit more simply because I'm mostly um involved in the business, right? Because I'm the one who's calculating the receipts, and you basically all you do is to give guidance and sort of decide the strategy. You could be doing that, but that seems to be a bit easier than what I'm doing, right? Then I mean, whoever is doing the accounting, they earn more as compared to the person who doesn't have much physically to contribute to the business other than ideas. Then it now comes to how they're taxed, right? So this means the partners doing the accounting who earns, let's say, 60% will now be taxed on 60% of the amount that they earn from the profits. They'll be taxed on that amount, right? Then the other person who earns 40% of the profits will also be taxed on that amount, which now means both of these partners will not be paying the same amount of taxes, right? Simply because they do not earn the same um profits from the company according to how they've sort of rationed, right? So I hope that makes sense, right? And let's come to 2.5. Sustainability would imply the continued existence of a business despite the challenges and the threats it faces. Okay, now back to the keyword and making sense of what I'm reading, right? So we just read sustainability. Sustainability, according to my understanding of English, refers to something which is long term, something which is long, with something which is not short term, something that's gonna last, right? Okay, now let's read it further. It goes on to say sustainability would imply the the continued existence. Now, another keyword which is sort of confirming this is continued existence, right? Of a business despite the challenges and threats it faces. Okay, well, I do not sense any false information from this statement, right? So is it true? I mean, most probably. Okay, it's true Sustainability does mean the business continues operating despite challenges, right? Okay, let's come to 2 point. Okay, before we go to question 3, there's questions from the EMS term 3 notes, which are saying, what is the maximum number of members allowed in a partnership? Second one says, what are the 2 types of taxes paid by a public company shareholder? Huh? Okay, it says, what are the 2 types of taxes? 2 types of taxes paid by a public company shareholder. Oh, so this means that a public company shareholder pays 2 types of taxes. Okay, well, these are questions from the notes. And if you guys understand, please leave the answer in the description. But also the answers um on the notes, right? Because right now I can't necessarily recall what are the 2 types of taxes, but they're there on the notes, right? And I mean, would it help to understand this before you go to write the exam? I mean, obviously, right? Okay, so let's do question 3. Analyze the following transactions according to the table provided in your answer booklet. Okay, according to the table, okay, that means you'll be, for this question paper, we would have been given a answer booklet. Okay, now this is because we are now getting into transactions, right? Okay, let's read 3.1. The owner, Alan Gray, deposited an amount of 150,000 into the business bank account as his startup capital for the business. Okay. The owner invests 150,000 into the business account. This increases assets bank, right? And increases owner's equity because it's capital introduced by the owner. Okay, second transaction says he purchased 35,000 worth of electrical equipment from Light It Up CC and paid by check. Well, I think this one is gonna go. This one is gonna be subtracted from the bank. Okay. The business purchases electrical equipment for 35,000 and pays by check. This decreases assets or bank and increases assets, equipment. By the same amount, so the total assets value remains unchanged. No effect on owner's equity or liabilities. Some of you would have thought this was expenses, you know? So this is what I'm saying by the 200 questions and answers. Not only answers that are explained, right? Do you see how this is well explained? We even explain further on these questions for the answers that are there, right? Because you cannot practice over 60 accounting equation related questions with explained answers, and when you come across such a question you do not know what to do, right? So make use of the questions that are there, right? Especially for those of you who are preparing only the day before the exam, which I do not advise, by the way. I mean, to avoid this, all you can do is to subscribe to this channel because we are going to do this for every single subject, right? For term 3 and term 4, and even next year when you have passed, we're going to do this for grade 9, which is where you are heading, right? So make sure to subscribe so that you can be notified when we um post these videos, which we do not a week before the exam. We do this before the term even starts, before you guys even come back to school, right? So that you can prepare for term 3 before term 3 even starts, right? So make sure to also prepare yourself not before, not the day before writing the exam. Do this, at least a week before, right? Okay, so 3.2, he purchased 35,000 worth of electrical equipment from Light It Up CC and paid by check. So here's one thing that I'm picking up about this question, which is the context. We are not given a context here. Do you see how we are just being blasted with questions? Right? Usually they will be like, okay, this partner and this partner, they do this. But now it's just questions. So there's no problem about this. I guess we'll find out more about the context through the questions, right? Okay. So he purchased 35,000 worth of electrical equipment from Let It Up CC and paid by check. Okay. That's coming from the bank also. The business purchases electrical equipment for 35,000 and pays by check. This decreases assets, which is bank, and increases assets, which is the equipment account, right? By the same amount. So the total assets value remains unchanged. No effect on owner's equity or liabilities. Yeah, that makes sense. 3.3, Alan Green installed a geyser into the home of one of his clients and charged 6,500 for services provided. Okay, now we are getting a bit more grasp of this owner, right? Because Alan Gray, whom we were not given a context about his business, now we are being told that he installed a geyser into the home of one of his clients and he charged 6,500 for services provided. So the keyword here, right? Remember the keyword, services provided. Would you say services provided if it was not a business? No, right? Services are only provided by businesses. Even if it's not a for-profit business, even if it's an NGO, they do provide services and they do charge money, right? So now we understand that Alan Gray, his expertise or the industry his company is in the geyser installing industry, right? Now we are also get to understand that he has skills that are related to installing of geysers. So he seems to be an expert in this industry, and therefore that's why he installed one for his clients, right? And charged 6,500. So we now understand the nature of his business, right? So the business earns 6,500 for services rendered. This increases assets, cash bank, and increases owner's equity as its income earned by the business. Yeah, all right. 3.4. He paid wages to one of his workers and paid cash 2,500. The business pays wages of 2,500 in cash. This decreases assets cash bank and decreases owner's equity because wages are an expense that reduces profit and therefore equity. Okay, so any expense that reduces profit is also subtracted from owner's equity, right? As far as the accounting equation is concerned. So 3.5, Ellen Gray withdrew an amount of 2,000 for his personal use. The owner withdraws 2,000 for personal use, called a drawings transaction. This decreases assets, cash or bank, and decreases owner's equity. Because it's money taken out of the business for personal use. Okay, yeah, that's that about the accounting equation. And a bit of questions here. Questions from the EMS term 3, 200 plus questions and answers. Okay. It says, what if Ellen Gray's business specialized in installing pools instead of installing geysers? How would this affect the transaction 3.3 where he installed a geyser and charged 6,500? Do you guys know? I mean, if you know, try answer this question in the comments. All right. Now, question 4. Fast and Furious Sports Cars Ltd. A. Ali and B. Baba recently opened Fast and Furious Sports Cars. They had an equal share in the business. Soon they realized that they could not manage the business by themselves, as they did not have enough funds to meet the growing consumer demand. They decided to incorporate and sell shares. The business is now called Fast and Furious Sports Cars Ltd. Residents of a nearby town have complained about the noise levels and pollution coming from their factory production processes. Okay, now because sometimes I like to read the questions before I read the context, so that when I'm reading the context, I can ask myself the questions that I just read before, right? So then I'll be trying to figure out how can I answer the questions. So, however, let's go through 4.1, all right? Name the type of ownership. So we're 4.1.1, which says before they decided to sell the shares. So they were partners, right? Before that, until they sold the shares, right? All right, so let's see what Capsa says. Okay, they were partner, which is called a partnership, right? After they decided to sell their shares, then it became a public company because they listed their company into the stock exchange, and a lot of people were now able to invest in the company, you know, and buy the shares. So a partnership is when two or more people run a business together, sharing profits, responsibilities, and risks. A public company is a registered business that raises capital by selling shares to the public. Okay. The form of ownership identified in 4.1.1 above would involve unlimited liability. What do you understand by this concept? What do you understand by the concept of unlimited liability? Unlimited liability means that if the business cannot pay its debts, the owner's partners are personally responsible. This means their personal assets like cars, houses, or savings can be saved, can be used to settle business debts, which is what we covered during one of the first questions, right? If you can remember. Yeah. 4.3, two examples of typical provisions or information in a partnership agreement. Well, one of the obvious ones is the ratios, right? Who's gonna earn how much, and in which profits and losses, by the way, not only profits and also losses, will be shared between partners, right? So the second point is responsibilities and duties of each partner, which is basically what I sort of explained in one of the questions, to say one person might be doing more and the other person might be responsible for less tasks, right? Which then leads to allocation of ratios, right? So a partnership agreement outlines rules and expectations to avoid conflict. I mean, I would imagine if one partner is working harder than the other and they're not paid more, yeah, it would be pretty much stressful and leading to conflicts, right? Including financial arrangements and operational duties, which is basically what each of the partners is responsible for, right? What they've agreed to, basically the terms that they've agreed to, right? So yeah, that's that. Describes two advantages of the following. 4.1 partnership. Shared responsibilities. Yeah, I mean, if two people are good at two different things, that means more will get done, right? For example, let's say one owner is good at the accounting, which I mentioned, and the other one is good at sales, right? I mean that's like the backbone of a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses basically just have to be good at sales, then managing the sales, or in terms of the transactions that take place, right? Which is the accounting side. So shared responsibilities, partners can divide tasks based on their skills. Second is more capital than a sole trader. So since two people or more people invest money into the business, yeah, since two or more people invest money into the business, right? So obviously, I mean, if it's two partners, I mean, even if it's a public company, the more people are investing in that company, the better, because it's gonna grow, right? Okay, so let's come up here. 4.5. Describe two important differences between a private company and a public company. These are things that you will understand after reading the notes or having done the 200 questions, right? So, yeah, I mean, if you do the 200 questions along with the notes, I mean, by the time the report cards come out, people will be shocked to say, what? Were you cheating or what? What? Right? I mean, try to shock people. Trust me, it works. If you practice, you use the notes, you'll be unstoppable. Trust me. So, two important differences between a private company and a public company. We skipped public company, right? 4.4.2. Yeah, I can see that we skip 4.4.2. Public company, because we described most of 4.4.1. 4.4.2 before we do 4.5. So the advantages of a public company, right, is it can raise large amounts of capital, right? Yeah, similarly like a partnership, but I think a public company stands more chance to raise even more capital because once it's listed, a lot of people know about it and they can easily invest in the company. So by selling shares to the public and also by limited liability. Yeah, which is what we just read in the beginning, right? That shareholders are only liable for the amount they invested. Personal assets are protected. Okay, so two important differences between a private company and a public company. Okay, the private company, shares are not freely sold to the public. B, public company, okay, shares are freely sold to the stock exchange. I mean, that's easy to differentiate after what we now know, right? Must have at least one director or more than 50 shareholders. And no more than 50 shareholders, right? Not more than 50 shareholders. Must have, okay, a public company must have at least 3 directors and an unlimited number of shareholders. So a private company, the name ends with Pty Ltd. The public company, the name ends with Ltd. The private company does not have to publish financial statements publicly. Public company must publish audited financial statements for public access, right? Which, I mean, they might do this in the news, in the announcements, pretty much informing everybody who has invested in that company. And they do that publicly, right? If they're going to expand the company in a certain, or rather, generally like expanding the company, they will make that announcement, right? All right. Okay, 4.6. How should Fast and Furious Sports Cars Ltd address environmental issues to maintain sustainability? They should invest in environmentally friendly production processes. Like using noise reducing machinery and emission control systems, and comply with environmental regulations to reduce noise and pollution. This ensures long-term business sustainability and good community relations. Which they wanted how many points? I think 1, right? Okay. I mean, they did mention that this factory is producing a lot of smoke, right? And people are complaining about it. Okay. Let's read it. I think it was the last sentence, which says residents of a nearby town have complained about the noise levels and pollution. Okay, so it's not only pollution, it's also the noise levels coming from their factory production processes. So they make a lot of noise and a lot of smoke is coming from the factory, which now ends up contaminating the oxygen levels and, you know, and making noise pollution, right? Which disturbs the surrounding people, and how would you sleep if a factory is always making noise and producing a lot of smoke. This is this is where in some cases you might find people having to wear nose masks, right? Because this kind of pollutions might lead to people having like health problems, especially people that are very sensitive, their bodies, right? So they can use machinery that is not loud, and they can also ensure that they have like eco-friendly production processes. You can have your own answer when it comes to this one, right? It's not necessarily like supposed to be just one same answer from all students, right? But of course, it has to be referring to the things that have been mentioned in the context, right? So 4.7, businesses have an important role to play in creating sustainable jobs for the economy. Based on the scenario above, explain how Fast and Furious Sports Cars Ltd have contributed to sustainable job creation. Well, by going um by listing their company and growing it, I mean, now they have more people investing, now they have more capital, more people are employed, more expansion. I mean, that's basically how it works, right? So, by expanding their business and becoming a public company, they have created new job opportunities in production, management, and administration. This not only reduces unemployment but also contributes to economic growth by providing stable long term employment opportunities, right? Okay, there's other questions from, okay, the 200 questions and answers. It says, what would the business form of ownership be if Ali and Baba decided to sell shares privately instead of publicly, right? The second answer says, what are the 6 main advantages of a private company, Pty Ltd in South Africa? Well, all the answers are there on the 200 plus questions and answers, right? With explanations. And if you want to see the answers to these questions, I mean, the link is also in the description, right? Okay. Now let's come to question 5. Jabushezi has spotless dry cleaning service business. Enter the transactions in the cash receipt journal and cash payments journal for September 2018. Use the headings provided. Cast the journal end of the month. Okay, so these are the transactions. So let's see what Caps AI says. Okay, let's first read it. Okay. Okay. Jabu started his business by depositing 280,000 from his personal savings account to the check account of the business as his capital contribution. Receipts 001. This is a cash receipt for the business as a startup capital, increasing the bank balance. All right. And so basically for this kind of questions, you'll be given a booklet to write on. It will be basically a booklet that you'll be able to write all this information, right? but it's just that basically here we couldn't do that, but we have these transactions in this kind of way, right? But you can also, I mean, the only place where we actually show you how CPJ and CRJ transactions are recorded is in the 200 plus questions and answers, right? That's where you'll be able to see how it actually looks on um that form, right? Where you're able to record even the receipt, right? The amount, what is it for, and all that, right? So that's only available on the 200 plus questions and answers, which you can go ahead and start practicing after this, right? Okay, let's go to the second transaction. It says paid 550 to Daily News for advertising. Okay, this is a cash payment for advertising expenses, reducing the bank balance, which goes to the CPJ, right? The first transaction, obviously, it was on the CRJ. Okay, the third transaction says purchased a delivery van from Iron Motors for 95,000 Rand paid by check. CPJ. This is a payment for an asset, not expense, right? I hope you are I hope you will not forget this, right? Some of you may mistake um equipment, you know, for like expenses, which is not true, right? It goes to assets, because anything which is like what the company is gonna use to do their operations is not expenses but equipment, right? There's a difference. So I hope that's not confusing. Paid telecom 250 for telephone contract. Now this is what we call an expense, right? Payment was affected by EFT. This is a cash payment for telephone expenses, right? Reducing their bank balance. Received 2,500 cash for doing laundry. Okay, that's income. This is cash income from services rendered, increasing the bank balance. It goes to the CRJ. Cash check was drawn for wages for 1,200. This is a cash payment for wages, reducing the bank balance. Goes to the CPJ. 22 issued a receipt to a tenant and nulls for 2,400. Okay, so here's one thing about this transaction, right? I'll give you this one example because I've seen a laundry. So you know these businesses that you take your jeans, your shirt to be washed there and cleaned and all that. So you'll find that company was registered and it existed. Then somebody realizes an opportunity to then go and say, hey, can I do the sewing of clothes, right? Then they start doing the sewing on the side, but then the condition or the agreement then becomes they will pay a certain amount to rent that place, right? Which is very normal. I've seen that with a couple of businesses. And yeah, it's, I mean, you might come across these kind of transactions and wonder whether, so which basically means that if there's a tenant in that building, in this case, this is also part of that business's income, right? Because it's within the business premises, as compared to if they were doing another business which only deals with renting buildings to people, right? Which would not be looked at the same. So I hope that's clear. And we have such questions on the 200 questions, right? Which challenge you to say, okay, let's say a business is here and then they receive an amount from another business. What should be done with that transaction, right? Some of you might be confused by this, right? So this is what I'm saying, that such questions are there on the 200 questions. So make sure to go ahead and practice it, right? So that you're not confused by this. Okay, so received 2,400 from a tenant. This is cash income from rent, increasing the bank balance. Okay. Paid 800 to the fixed tires for fixing a tire puncture. Issued a check. So I hope the business vehicle had a puncture on its way, and they had to pay 800 to fix the tires, right? This is a cash payment for vehicle repairs, not expenses, by the way. So cash payment for vehicle repairs, right? Reducing the bank balance, right? So yeah, I think this is the last question. Let me see. Yeah, it's the last question. But then there's a couple of more questions from the 200 questions and answers. Okay. The first one says, if Jabo made the laundry sale on credit instead of cash on 15th September, how would that affect the journal entry? Would it still appear in the CRJ? Well, the answer is on the questions and answers, right? That's one of the questions. Two, on 8th September, Jabu purchased a vehicle, or rather a delivery van for 95,000 Rand and paid by check. Explain how this transaction affects the accounting equation. Why might this transaction be mistakenly classified as an expense, and what is the correct classification? Oh, okay. So you are asked to explain how this transaction is going to affect the accounting equation, right? For those of you who know the answer, I mean, you might as well just write it on the comment section, right? So yeah, and you can also see the answer. The link is in the description to these to over 200 questions and answers. All right, so that's it for this question paper. And by the way, we also have other term 3 subject question papers, I mean, such as natural science, EMS, maths, technology, and more. And we have videos on them, and I mean, you are gonna find them on this channel, so you can just finish watching this video and go and watch them, right? Or during the time that you feel that you are preparing for these other subjects, right? But as far as EMS, I mean, one thing I would advise you guys to do from watching this video is to go and practice the 200 questions and answers, and download the notes that we have put together for you guys, right? Because these notes, you might have lost your notes that you have given in class, or you might have not written notes at all, right? Which I know some of you. These notes will save you, right? Big time. Because we make sure that we include everything in there which has been covered for term 3, which is on the scope and the exam, right? So I hope you have learned more and you have benefited from this video, and make use of the educational resources that we have provided for you. And it should be easier to pass EMS term 3 after doing all that, right? And go past this term 3 EMS, right? Get distinctions. I mean, it will be easier to get a distinction after studying the 200 questions, after going through even this little game that we have, because it's based on the same topics that you guys are going to write about, and going through the notes, right, which you'll find the links on the description. And yeah, that should make it easier for you guys to pass EMS term 3, right? So I wish you good luck, and yeah, go and pass this term 3 exam, right? Make sure that you subscribe for when we post the term 3 for other subjects, and also for when we post the term 4, right? Revisions, so that you don't miss out, right? And we do that before term 4 even starts, right? So make sure that you subscribe so that you can be notified when we post other revisions, and stay ahead, right? So good luck on your exams.